What happens when Hollywood's biggest action star comes face to face with late-night television's most provocative host? You won't believe what unfolds when Tom Cruise sits down for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to find himself trapped in a verbal battlefield that would leave audiences speechless and social media in absolute chaos. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in the most explosive late-night confrontation ever captured on live television. The stage was set for what appeared to be another typical celebrity appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live. Tom Cruise had arrived to promote his latest mission, Impossible film, looking every bit the polished movie star in his perfectly tailored navy suit. The audience was buzzing with excitement, phones already recording as they anticipated the usual charming banter between Hollywood royalty and their beloved late-night host. But from the moment Cruise walked onto that stage, something felt different. The energy was electric, but not in the way anyone expected. Jimmy Kimmel emerged from behind his desk with that signature smirk that his fans have come to love and his critics have learned to fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man who does his own stunts and apparently his own thinking, Tom Cruise." The introduction landed with a thud that sent ripples through the studio audience. Cruise's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before he recovered, extending his hand for what should have been a friendly greeting. "Jimmy, always a pleasure," Cruise said, his voice carrying that trademark intensity that had made him one of the biggest stars on the planet. But Kimmel's grip lingered just a moment too long, and his eyes held something that looked more like challenge than welcome. Tom, Kimmel began as they settled into their chairs. "I have to say, you look fantastic for someone who's been jumping off buildings for the past 40 years. Tell me, when you're hanging from a helicopter at 10,000 feet, do you ever think about maybe, I don't know, using a stunt double like every other sane person in Hollywood?" The question seemed innocent enough on the surface, but Cruise's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Jimmy, I think audiences deserve authenticity. When they see me on screen, they're seeing me, not some CGI creation or a masked double. That's the difference between real filmmaking and whatever passes for entertainment these days." Kimmel leaned back in his chair, his grin widening. Right, authenticity. Speaking of authentic, I have to ask about some of your more passionate moments over the years. Remember when you jumped on Oprah's couch? That was authentic, wasn't it? Some might say authentically unhinged, but hey, who am I to judge? The studio audience laughed nervously, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Cruise's publicist, sitting in the wings, looked like she wanted to crawl under the nearest rock. This wasn't going according to the pre-interview script they'd carefully crafted. "Jimmy, I think passion is something this industry could use more of," Cruise replied, his voice taking on an edge that made seasoned Hollywood reporters in the audience lean forward in their seats. "When you believe in something, when you really believe in it, you don't apologize for showing that belief. Maybe that's a concept that's foreign to some people who spend their time making jokes about others instead of creating something meaningful themselves." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kimmel's smile never wavered, but his eyes had gone cold. "Oh, creating something meaningful. Right. Like that time you told Matt Lauer that psychiatry was a pseudoscience? Or when you criticized Brooke Shields for taking medication for postpartum depression? That kind of meaningful creation?" Cruise's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "Jimmy, I think we're veering into territory that—" No, Tom, let's stay right here in this territory," Kimmel interrupted, his voice taking on that mocking tone that had made him famous and infamous in equal measure. "Because this is what I find fascinating about you. You make these incredible action movies, you do these death-defying stunts, but then you also have these very strong opinions about things like medicine and science. And I'm just curious, where exactly did you get your medical degree?" The audience was completely silent now, The kind of silence that only comes when people realize they're witnessing something that wasn't supposed to happen. Cruz's face had gone from movie star charming to something much more dangerous. His voice when he spoke was barely controlled. I think what's fascinating, Jimmy, is how someone can sit behind a desk every night and mock people who are actually out there trying to make a difference in the world. It must be nice to have a job where your biggest challenge is reading jokes off a teleprompter that other people wrote for you. Kimmel's laugh was sharp and humorless. Oh, so now we're talking about real jobs. That's rich coming from someone who belongs to an organization that— Careful, Jimmy. Cruz's voice cut through the air like a blade. Very careful. The warning hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Kimmel's producers were frantically signaling from the wings, but he seemed oblivious to everything except the man sitting across from him. Or what, Tom? You'll have me audited by your friends? You'll send me to some kind of camp to get my thinking straightened out? Kimmel's voice was dripping with sarcasm, but underneath it was something else, something that sounded almost like genuine anger. Cruz stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled backward. The audience gasped audibly. I think this interview is over, but Kimmel wasn't done. Sit down, Tom. We're just getting started. You came on my show and now you're going to answer some questions. Real questions. Not the softball promotional garbage your handlers usually arrange. The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in that studio could feel it. What had started as a seemingly routine celebrity interview was morphing into something unprecedented in late-night television history. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the escalating tension between two of the most recognizable faces in entertainment. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would make this opening exchange look like friendly small talk. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter as Cruz remained standing, his entire body radiating the kind of controlled intensity that had made him famous and roles where he played men pushed to their absolute limits. Kimmel, still seated behind his desk, looked up at the action star with the expression that mixed amusement with something far more sinister. You know what I love about this moment, Tom? Kimmel said, his voice taking on a conversational tone that somehow made his words even more cutting. This is the real you, not the carefully managed, media-trained version that your army of publicists usually parade around. This is the guy who really thinks he's untouchable. Cruz's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Jimmy, you have no idea what you're dealing with here. You think this is some kind of game? Oh, I know exactly what kind of game this is, Kimmel shot back, finally rising from his chair to face Cruz directly. This is the game where a talk show host asks legitimate questions and a guest tries to intimidate him into backing down. But here's the thing, Tom. I don't back down. Not from anyone. Not even from Hollywood royalty who thinks the rules don't apply to them. The audience was completely transfixed now, phones held high as they recorded what was rapidly becoming the most viral moment in late-night television history. Security guards had moved closer to the stage, but nobody seemed sure whether they should intervene or let this unprecedented confrontation play out. You want to talk about rules? Cruz's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the studio. Let's talk about the rules of basic human decency. Let's talk about the rule that says when someone comes on your show as a guest, you treat them with a minimum level of respect instead of ambushing them with personal attacks disguised as comedy. Kimmel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Respect? You want to talk about respect? How about the respect you should have shown to every person struggling with mental health issues when you went on national television and told them their medication was worthless? How about the respect you should have shown to new mothers dealing with postpartum depression when you attacked someone for seeking help? That's not what I said, and you know it, Cruz fired back, taking a step closer to Kimmel's desk. But this is what you people always do. You take something completely out of context, twist it beyond recognition, and then beat someone over the head with your distorted version of the truth. You people? Kimmel's eyebrows shot up. Who exactly are you people, Tom? comedians, talk show hosts, or maybe you mean something else entirely. Maybe you mean people who ask uncomfortable questions about your beliefs and your organization. The word organization hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Everyone in the studio knew what Kimmel was referring to, but nobody had expected him to go there so directly, so publicly. Cruz's face had gone completely white. "You're crossing a line here, Jimmy. A line you really don't want to cross." "What line is that, exactly?" Kimmel pressed, his voice getting louder with each word. "The line where we pretend that your personal beliefs don't influence the crazy things you say in public? The line where we act like your organization hasn't been documented doing things that would make most people's skin crawl? Or maybe the line where we pretend that someone with your platform doesn't have a responsibility to think before they speak?" Cruz moved around the desk with lightning speed, closing the distance between them until he was standing directly in front of Kimmel. The talk show host didn't back down, meeting Cruz's intense stare with one of his own. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Cruz said, his voice barely audible but somehow more threatening than if he had been shouting. "You sit in your little bubble, making your little jokes, thinking you understand the world. But you don't understand anything. You don't understand commitment. You don't understand dedication. And you certainly don't understand what it means to actually help people instead of just tearing them down for entertainment." "Help people?" Kimmel's voice was incredulous. "Is that what you call it when you convince people to abandon medical treatment? Is that what you call it when you support an organization that breaks up families and destroys lives? Because if that's your definition of helping, then maybe we need to have a serious conversation about what those words actually mean." The confrontation had reached a fever pitch. Camera operators were frantically adjusting their angles to capture every moment of this historic meltdown. In the control room, producers were simultaneously panicking about the content and celebrating what they knew would be the most watched clip in the show's history. Cruz's breathing was audible now, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to maintain control. "You know what the real problem is here, Jimmy? The real problem is that you're so desperate for ratings, so desperate to stay relevant, that you'll attack anyone and everyone if you think it'll get you a few more clicks on social media. You don't care about truth. You don't care about fairness. You only care about yourself. And you only care about protecting your precious image and your precious organization," Kimmel shot back without missing a beat. "At least I'm honest about what I do. I make jokes. I entertain people. I don't pretend to be some kind of guru or savior while I'm doing it." Cruz's laugh was bitter and harsh. "You entertain people? Is that what this is? Entertainment? Publicly? Humiliating someone who came here in good faith to promote their work? If this is your idea of entertainment, then maybe your ratings deserve to tank." "My ratings?" Kimmel's voice cracked with genuine anger for the first time. "You want to talk about my ratings? My ratings are just fine, thanks. But even if they weren't, at least I earned them honestly. I didn't have to join some weird cult to get where I am." The word cult hit the studio like a physical blow. The audience gasped collectively, and even the crew members who had seen everything in their years of television production looked shocked. Cruz's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, and something that looked almost like hurt. "That's it," Cruz said, his voice deadly quiet. "We're done here." But as he turned to leave, Kimmel wasn't finished. "Running away, Tom? That's not very mission. Impossible of you. I thought you were the guy who never backed down from a challenge." Cruz stopped dead in his tracks, his back still to Kimmel. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. When he slowly turned around, his face was a mask of barely controlled fury that made his most intense movie roles look tame by comparison. What happened next would push this confrontation into territory that nobody could have predicted. Silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Cruz turned around completely, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made everyone in the studio take an involuntary step backward. When he spoke, his voice was so controlled it was terrifying. You know what, Jimmy? You're absolutely right. I don't back down from challenges. And right now, you're the biggest challenge to basic human decency I've encountered in my entire career. Cruz walked back toward Kimmel with deliberate, measured steps. So let's finish this conversation. Let's really finish it. Kimmel's confidence wavered for the first time all evening. Something in Cruz's demeanor had shifted, and the show host was beginning to realize he might have pushed too far. But his ego wouldn't let him back down now, not with cameras rolling and an audience watching his every move. "Bring it on, Tom," Kimmel said, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments before. "Let's hear what the great Tom Cruz really thinks about people who don't buy into his worldview. You want to know what I really think?" Cruz's voice rose for the first time, filling the studio with raw emotion. "I think you're a coward. I think you hide behind your desk and your writers and your audience, taking cheap shots at people because it makes you feel powerful. You talk about helping people? You talk about truth? You wouldn't recognize either one if they walked up and introduced themselves." The audience was completely captivated, watching this unprecedented breakdown of Hollywood civility. Social media was already exploding with clips and commentary, but nobody in the studio was thinking about that anymore. This had become something primal, something real. "A coward?" Kimmel's voice cracked with indignation. "I'm a coward? I'm not the one who belongs to an organization that silences critics and destroys anyone who speaks out against them. I'm not the one who uses my fame and fortune to promote dangerous pseudoscience. And I'm certainly not the one having a complete meltdown on national television because someone asked me a few tough questions." Cruz laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any humor. "Tough questions? Is that what you call this character assassination? You didn't invite me here to ask questions, Jimmy. You invited me here to humiliate me. You wanted to create a spectacle, and congratulations, you got one. You created this spectacle all by yourself, Tom," Kimmel fired back. "All I did was ask you to be accountable for the things you've said and done. If that's humiliating to you, maybe you should think about why." Cruz stepped even closer, his face now inches from Kimmel's. The security guards moved forward, but both men ignored them completely. "You want accountability? Let's talk about accountability. Let's talk about how you've spent years making money off other people's pain. Let's talk about how you've built your entire career on mocking anyone who doesn't fit into your narrow little view of what's normal or acceptable. That's rich coming from you," Kimmel shot back, his own anger finally boiling over. "You want to talk about narrow views? You belong to a group that literally believes in alien souls and space dictators. You've attacked people for taking medication prescribed by actual doctors. And you have the nerve to lecture me about accountability?" The mention of specific beliefs hit Cruz like a physical blow. His composure, which had been hanging by a thread, finally snapped completely. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Jimmy? When I believe in something, I stand by it. I don't hide behind jokes and sarcasm. I put myself out there, and yes, sometimes I make mistakes. But at least I'm trying to make a difference in the world instead of just tearing other people down. For sport. Making a difference?" Kimmel's voice was incredulous. "By telling people not to trust their doctors? By supporting an organization that has been accused of abuse and exploitation? If that's your idea of making a difference, then maybe the world would be better off without your help." That final insult was the breaking point. Cruz's face went through a series of expressions: hurt, rage, and finally something like resignation. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but carried more weight than all his previous shouting. "You know what, Jimmy? You win. You got exactly what you wanted. You turned what should have been a simple interview into a circus, and now you'll have your viral moment. You'll get your clicks and your views, and you'll probably sleep just fine tonight, knowing you destroyed someone's reputation for entertainment value." Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Cruz held up a hand to stop him. "But here's what you need to understand," Cruz continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've survived every scandal, every controversy, every attempt to tear me down. And I'll survive this too. But you'll have to live with knowing that when you had the chance to have a real conversation with someone, you chose cruelty instead. You chose to be the kind of person who kicks someone when they're trying to be vulnerable." The studio was absolutely silent. Even Kimmel seemed stunned by the raw honesty in Cruz's words. "I came here tonight to talk about my work, to share something I'm passionate about with your audience," Cruz said, his voice now carrying a sadness that was almost heartbreaking to witness. "Instead, I got ambushed by someone who decided that my personal beliefs were more important than treating me like a human being." Cruz turned toward the audience, his voice carrying to every corner of the studio. "I want to apologize to all of you. You came here expecting entertainment, and instead you got to witness what happens when basic respect and decency break down. That's on both of us, but I'm sorry you had to see it." With that, Tom Cruise began walking toward the exit. But Kimmel, perhaps realizing that the confrontation was slipping away from him, made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "That's right, Tom, run away," Kimmel called out, his voice echoing through the studio. "Run back to your handlers and your yes-men who will tell you that none of this was your fault." Cruise stopped at the edge of the stage and turned around one final time. When he looked at Kimmel, there was no anger left in his eyes, only profound disappointment. "You know what the saddest part of all this is, Jimmy?" Cruz said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent studio. "You actually had the opportunity to have a real conversation tonight. You could have asked me about my craft, about what drives me, about the things I'm genuinely passionate about. Instead, you chose to be exactly what's wrong with our culture. Right now, someone who would rather destroy than understand, someone who mistakes cruelty for courage." With those words, Tom Cruise walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage, leaving behind a studio full of stunned audience members, a visibly shaken host, and what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. As the studio doors closed behind him, the silence that followed was deafening. Jimmy Kimmel stood alone behind his desk, his usual confident smirk replaced by an expression that looked almost lost. For the first time in his career, he seemed genuinely unsure of what to say next. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the aftermath. But the real drama was over. Tom Cruise was gone, and with him went any chance of salvaging what had started as a routine celebrity interview and ended as a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral completely out of control when ego and ambition collide with personal beliefs and human dignity. In the days that would follow, this confrontation would be dissected, analyzed, and debated across every platform and medium imaginable. But in that moment, in that studio, there was only silence and the unmistakable feeling that everyone present had just witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come.